Welcome back to Music Appreciation. Today we continue Module 6 with 6.2 Triads and Progressions. Let's take a look at today's lesson. So in this lesson, 6.2, we're really going to dig into the details of chords some more, specifically triads and progressions. So we're going to start by talking about chord recipes, what goes into a chord, triads, which are the most common and basic chords used in most Western music. Chord progressions, where the vertical meets horizontal, so chords, vertical, and the progressions of them, which are how the chords occur in order. That's a horizontal element. Roman numerals, which are the way that we traditionally talk about and label chords within a key. And then progression examples, so we'll be looking at some different cases where these things come up. So biggest thing for today is triads and progressions. I hope you enjoy. So today we're going to get into chords and the vertical dimension of music. I'd like to start off with a cheesy joke that I heard in a music theory class. Two country western guitarists are sitting around, and the first one says, "Hey, why do people always say that we only know three chords?" And the second one says, "Yeah, what's the third chord?" The joke being that some types of music only use, a few chords, but actually that could be a quality. We're going to get into the second half of today with chord progressions, thinking of the order of the chords and how many there are and that sort of thing. A really great song could be written with just a few chords, and that's actually a pretty great accomplishment if you're able to do that. I think the goal is picking the right chords for the lyrics, the right chords for the mood of the song, and how the chords relate to the melody, and all of that, of course, contributes to our feeling of whether the chords are working or not in the piece of music. So to start out today, I want to talk a little bit about what I'm calling the recipes for chords. So that means what goes into the chord, how many notes, how many pitches are in a chord, and how many do you need, how many could you have. So a chord, or any harmony, a chord is kind of a slang term for a harmony, or they're synonymous. So a chord it needs to have at least two pitches, because of one single pitch doesn't make a chord, but if you have at least two pitches, then you have a chord. That's called a dyad, so just meaning two parts. So dyads could be quite powerful and beautiful, and those would be labeled with the intervals that we talked about in the last lesson. So a minor third, a tritone, those are dyads. There's just two notes present. But generally, chords contain about 3 or 4 pitches in the one chord, and most commonly they have 3 pitches. A chord with 3 pitches is called a triad, and that's going to be our focus for today. Most of the music that you hear on the radio and in pop and rock, hip hop, etc. styles are triads. So when you hear a conglomeration of notes, you usually hear 3 notes. 4 notes is pretty common, 4 pitches. That's called a 7th chord. We'll come back to that next lesson. And of course, you could have more than 4 pitches in a chord, but that's usually in jazz, classical, contemporary classical, and experimental music, and more out there stuff. And it definitely happens, but not as often in the most common styles. So to sum up, a recipe for a chord could be just 3 notes, or it could be a conglomeration of a bunch of notes, and picking those is kind of part of the fun of learning about chords and designing a piece of music. So as I said, we're going to focus first on triads today. Triads are, we might say, like the building blocks of Western harmony. So I mentioned in the last lesson that the medieval monks preferred perfect intervals. Remember the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth, because they are sort of pure and simple. So if we just hear those two notes, they would start and end all of their music on that. Whereas if we add in a third note, what we're adding in is the piece that colors it to be major or minor, and that creates the triad. So the tradition kind of comes out of maybe about 400 or 500 years ago, when instead of preferring just perfect intervals of fourths and fifths, the music started to include more thirds. So you might remember from the last lesson that a third is either a minor third is 3 half steps, and a major third is 4 half steps. So I'll play you here. This is a G chord with no third. It has this kind of hollow sound. And here it is with a third. This is a major third. So you can hear the hollow just perfect, and then with the major third. So it kind of sweetens it, and it colorizes it to be, to have a kind of valence of major or minor. Here's the same chord, G, but with a minor third. So here's the major, here's the minor. So those two chords, the major triad and the minor triad, are going to be our focus for today. And again, they constitute probably 95 or even more % of the chords that you hear daily in the music that you listen to. Unless you're into a bunch of jazz, and which case, good on you, and we can always get into those more funky chords. Next lesson we'll be getting into that kind of stuff a little bit more. But first we want to just start with thinking about what's in a triad. How is that built? How do those relate to our major scales that we've learned about? So I'm going to move over to the visual lesson here and show you a few things. So let's look at what is in a triad. So triads, as I said, probably the last 500 years or so, have become the building blocks of most Western music. They, again, are 3-note chords, and they're stacked in thirds. So already we see one of the downsides of the way music is discussed, in that in this one sentence we have 3 different words for 3: triad, 3, and thirds. So I do recognize that's a bit tricky to pick up at first. So if you can try to get kind of encoded in your mind that a triad is a collection of 3 notes as a chord. A third is an interval between 2 notes that are that far apart, a third apart. And here I'm just saying a 3-note chord. There are even other words like mediant that we'll run into that mean 3, but part of the reason why there are these different words for 3 is that to help kind of show what they're referring to. So a third is an interval between 2 notes. A triad is a collection of 3 notes as a chord. So when the notes are stacked in thirds, the bottom note is called the root. So that's our name for the bottom note of the chord. It's the note that gets the name for the chord. So here we're going to look at G major, and the G major chord, G is the root. It's the bottom of the chord when it's stacked in thirds. So the other members of the chord are their distance from the root. So here we see third and fifth again, and those are the same as the interval of a third. It's a third away from G. So if you think about, remember from last time, we would go from G to A would be a second, G to B is a third, G to C is a fourth, and G to D is a fifth. Just keep in mind that when we're talking about, these are called chord members, when we're talking about these, that this is a third, But there also is a third, for example, between B and D. It's just that that third is not as important in this chord, and these are labeled by their interval from the root. So the B is a third from the root, and the D is a fifth from the root. So GBD is an example of a major chord. We went up a third to B, up a third again to D. So that's what I mean by triads are three-note chords stacked in thirds. So these are the thirds. So we could say that this is a major third and this is a minor third. I'll come back to that in a minute. But when we talk about the chord, we talk about the root of the chord. We could have called it the first, but we just call it the root, and then the third and fifth of the chord. So the bulk of what we want to encode from today is the major triad and the minor triad. Very, very similar. There's just one difference in terms of the content, but it's an important difference, as you just heard on the guitar, in terms of the sound. So both the major and minor triads contain a perfect fifth. So, for example, from G to D, that's a perfect fifth. If we wanted to see a minor chord, I can go ahead and copy that here. So this is the G major chord. If we wanted to see the same type of thing as a minor chord, what we would see is the same pitches, but with a B flat instead of a B. So we could count the half steps between these notes, and we could measure the distances. So keep in mind both of these have a perfect fifth from G to D. So major triads and minor triads both have a perfect fifth. The difference is it a B or a B flat? So if we were to count the half steps involved in between these individual pitches, let's start with the G major. So this is a G. To get up to B, we go up a major third, which is 4 half steps. G, G sharp, A, B flat, and then B. So it's G to B. That's a major third. And then that means the distance from B to D is B, C, C sharp, D. It's 3 half steps, or a minor third. So just keeping in mind that the basic definition of a major triad is it's a major third from the root and a perfect fifth from the root. But, just to be clear, there is a minor third in between the third and the fifth of the chord. Now let's compare that to the minor triad. In the minor triad, we have a minor third from the root. This should be a lowercase m. We have a minor third from the root and a perfect fifth again. So that means from G to B flat is a minor third, and then from B flat to D becomes a major third. This might seem trickier than just not pointing this out, but I've found over the years that when teaching this, some folks can get a little thrown off by thinking about the third in between the third and the fifth of the chord, and how it also changes quality. But if you think about the G and D stay the same, and what's most important is the interval from the root. In the case of a major triad, it's a major third. In the case of the minor triad, it's a minor third. So that is the major and minor triads. Let's hear them again. I'll just use a different chord. I'll use A. So here's A major, and let's just listen to the sound of a major triad. And here's A minor triad. Major, minor. So we can hear these two notes, the root and the fifth, stay the same, while the third, which is here, changes. So here's the major. I I can just play these three notes. This is root, third, fifth, major, and then root, third, fifth, minor. We can hear that the root and the fifth stay the same. So, as I said, major and minor triads constitute about 99% of the triads you run into. There are two other triads, and here's where, the scope of this class doesn't really allow or warrant us to go deep into these other triads. But for those of you who are interested, there are two other triads that are possible. They're the augmented and diminished triads. And if you want to know real fast, put on your earmuffs if you don't want extra information right now. But if you do, the diminished triad is two minor thirds. So it's a minor third and a minor third. So that makes a diminished fifth or a low fifth. It doesn't have a perfect fifth, and it sounds pretty strange. So that is like this. That's a diminished triad. The opposite would be the augmented triad, which has two major thirds. So it goes, and it does not have a perfect fifth either because it has an augmented fifth, also known as a raised fifth. So these other two triads, mostly for that reason, they don't have a perfect fifth. We don't really hear them very often. They're not in bold. They won't be on the test, but they do exist. In fact, when we look at the Roman numerals in a little while, you will see that the diminished triad does show up in one place in the major and minor keys, but it's often avoided or replaced. So so let's move on. What we want to know about is the major and minor triads. So again, the quality of the triad, as I say here, is dictated. So quality means major or minor, or diminished or augmented. The quality of the triad is dictated by the quality of the bottom third and the outer fifth. So that's just another way of saying a major triad is called major because it has a major third on the bottom from the root. And a minor triad is called a minor triad because it has a minor third from the root. They both have a perfect fifth. So we could go through all the notes, for example, in C major. We know that the white keys on the piano allow us to play C major. And we could go all through all of the different triads by just spreading the notes out. You basically skip a note, right? So if you go up a third, let's say C, E, G, which is a C major triad, you just go C, skip D, and play E, skip F, and play G. So it's just skipping a note. It's another way of talking about what a triad is. We're not going to go through all of them and figure them out at this moment. I'll show you them in a second, but you could measure the half steps between each of these notes, and based on what we just talked about, you could figure out whether they're major or minor or diminished. So C, E, G is major, and you could either memorize that or you could figure it out by counting how many half steps are from C to E. As it turns out, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's a major third. And from C to G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is a perfect fifth. And so this is a major triad. And the D, F, A is a minor triad because D to F is only 3 half steps. But I'm not asking you to go through and measure all those. If you're interested in this, please do. It's quite fun, and you'll figure out what's in a major key pretty fast. I'll go ahead and summarize what's there. So this is just all the triads you could build in the key of C major. And here's what the qualities are. So there are 3 major triads. There's C major, F major, and G major. There are 3 minor triads. D minor, E minor, and A minor. I'll go ahead and play those for you. So this is the key of C. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So we're taking that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do and just stacking it up in triads. C major, F major, G major, D minor, whoops, D minor, E minor, and A minor. And there's one diminished triad. It's BDF. It's the B diminished triad. And again, it exists. It's very rare to actually see that. And you can see how the major scale has these 6 major and minor triads, 3 major, 3 minor, and that's mostly what you hear in songs. You will hear once in a while a B diminished triad. It does happen. So I just want to talk very briefly about chord symbols. Again, we're not going to be tested on chord symbols in this class. They can get rather complex, but at the simplest level, I do want you to know what these symbols mean. So when you look at a song like the one we're about to do, Wild Mountain Thyme, and you see these symbols, you just see a letter and you see an M here. I want to explain what that means. So a major triad is abbreviated in chord symbols as just the root letter. So C major is just C. E major is E. That's it. So F sharp major chord, you will just see F sharp. It's just a shorthand. Since major chords are probably the most common, that's the fastest way to write down a chord, which sums up, 3 different notes. So like this GBD can be summed up with just the chord symbol G. And then for minor triads, we see the pitch letter of the root again and M. Once in a while you will see this minus sign. I really hate that symbol because it's hard to see and it's easily overlooked. Sometimes you'll see MIN. Most of the time you'll see just a little m. So for example, G minor shows up as G little m. F sharp minor, F sharp little m. So down here in this song you'll see this means G major triad, E minor triad, C major, G major, C major, D major, E minor, C major, A minor, etc. So just again to come back up here to our G minor triad, you would see G little m for this. So it's a nice way for us to write out a bunch of chords without having to write 3 notes each time. So that's how we're going to look at it. And now let's go ahead and come back to this song Wild Mountain Thyme and listen to that and talk a little bit about the chord progression. Before we do that, just to say what a chord progression is, a progression just means a sequence of chords. That usually that sequence will repeat every verse or every chorus. It could just be a couple chords or it could be a long sequence. And I think it's important to note that a chord progression is a combination of the vertical and horizontal dimensions, because the vertical dimension is just the chord itself, and the horizontal time element now gets incorporated because a chord progression is about what chord comes after what chord. So let's go ahead and check out this song. So we're going to return to the song Wild Mountain Thyme just as an example to show a chord progression. You might remember this song from when we talked about meter. The song is in 6/8. So I'll play through the song. I'm going to do it in the key of G, and then we'll talk and look at the chord progression. Oh, the summertime is coming, and the trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain thyme blooms around the purple heather. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together to pull wild mountain thyme all around the purple heather. Will you go, lassie, go? So that's the only section to the song. It repeats with different words. If my true love will not go, I will surely find another to pull wild mountain thyme all around the purple heather. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together to pull wild mountain thyme here we can see the chord progression for Wild Mountain Thyme. I have organized it into these lines, kind of like lines in a stanza in poetry, just to kind of keep track of the pattern that's going on. You can see that line 2 and line 4 are the same, and line 5 is just the beginning of line 3. So there's some kind of internal repetition here. Taking stock of the chords that are present, these are what we would call diatonic chords, just meaning that these are all chords we expect in the key of G. And so just taking stock, we have G, E minor, C, D, and A minor. So I believe that's 5 chords total. So it's a pretty typical amount of chords, a pretty typical organization. I just use these vertical lines to show measures. So this dash is between 2 chords in one measure. But yeah, we have 3 major chords, G, C, and D, and we have 2 minor chords, E minor and A minor. I think it's a rather nice classic song. So this is something you might see as you spell out a chord progression. I would invite you to do this with some of the songs that you are interested in. You might be able to look up the chords for them online, or if you're really adventurous, try to figure them out yourself. Here is another way that you often see a chord progression. Here, let me go ahead and move this into one place. So sometimes you'll see the chords written just right above the lyrics. So there's an obvious advantage to this if you know the song, because it shows you where the chords occur in relation to the lyrics. But the flip side or the downside to this would be it doesn't show you the timing. You can see that they're spaced out only in terms of the words. If you think about how words fall in a measure, they don't necessarily fall on the beats. They don't necessarily come at the beginning of the measures. So this doesn't show you the overall time organization or rhythms or meters like the other version does. But both of these are totally acceptable ways to write a chord progression. And you just be writing out the chords like this. So I'll go ahead and play the first verse one more time, just so that you can look at the chords now and think about it, so you can hear the difference between the major and minor chords. You can see the repetition between the lines, and kind of get a sense for how that works. Oh, the summertime is coming, and the trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain thyme blooms around the purple heather. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together to the wild mountain thyme, all around the purple heather. Will you go, lassie, go? So now we're going to move on to talk about Roman numerals. So Roman numerals, that's the numbering system that uses I's and V's that you're probably familiar with. So that's used in music for one specific purpose, and it's used to talk about chord progressions and to show them in a way that isn't specific to the key. So instead of seeing G, E minor, C like we just saw, we can just talk about them in relation to the key as 1, 4, 6, etc. So we talked about solfege and how the do, re, mi, sol system uses those terms so that it's not locked into one key. It allows us to talk about melodies, do, re, mi, sol, la. And then if I change the key, do, re, mi, sol, la, the same intervals, the same relationships are present. It's just in a different key. So it's really, really useful, that solfege, and also Roman numerals, which allow us to talk about a chord progression. And then we could use that same Roman numeral label to play the same progression in any key. So if you're a vocalist and you're playing a song with a friend and it's just hard to hit the notes in your vocal range, you can change the key for the song. If you did that and they were reading the chord symbols, G, E minor, etc., then all the chord symbols would be different when you change the key. So they might say F, D minor, etc. But if you're thinking in terms of Roman numerals, they would all be the same. 1, 5, 6, etc. So let's go ahead and look at those and see how that works. So if you don't remember how to write in Roman numerals, we only need to count ever through 7 because that's how many scale degrees we have in a normal scale. So 1 through 7 would be 1, it looks like I, 2, 2 I's, 3, 3 I's, 4 is IV because V is 5 and the I to the left of the V is -1, so it's 4 looks like this. 5 is a V. 6 is the V plus 1, so it's on the other side, so that's 6. 7 is VII, and then we go back to 1. So again, you're not going to be tested on this, on figuring out a song like this, but I want you to know how these work. So what are they telling us? They're telling us what the root of the chord is in relation to the key. So let's take the key of C. Again, we can use the white keys on the piano and we can play all the triads that are possible in the key of C by just starting on C and then on D, etc. And we mentioned a minute ago that results in 3 major triads and 3 minor triads and 1 diminished triad. And let's go ahead and see how that works with Roman numerals. You'll get the idea here. So you just give the Roman numeral number the scale degree or the position in the scale of that key. So the number shows for whatever key you're in where you are in that scale. So in the key of C major, this is our scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And so these are the numbers for the triads built on those pitches. So if you're in the key of C and you have a D triad, it's the number 2. If you're in the key of C and you have an F triad, it's the number 4. So Roman numerals show us 2 things. They show the number of the scale degree, and that's really important because the position in the scale matters. If we're on the 1 chord, it has a feeling of home and a feeling of resolution. If we're on a 7 or a 5, we have this feeling more of having some tension and needing some resolution. If we're on 2, for example, we might just feel we're a little 1 step away from home. I'll just leave it at that for now, but the number shows us that relationship to the key by showing us the scale number of its root. And then the other thing that the Roman numerals show us is whether they're major or minor. And so a major Roman numeral is capitalized and a minor is lowercase. So this progression of major and minor chords is it's not unique to C major, it's true for all 12 major keys. So that in a major key, the 1 chord, the chord built on the 1st scale degree, is always major. The chord built on the 4th scale degree and the 5th scale degree are also major. So you might even hear people talk casually about songs that go 1, 4, 5. Those are all 3 major chords in a major key. What they mean is the roots of those chords are built on the 1, the 4, and 5 of the scale. So those are our 3 major triads, 1, 4, and 5 in a major key. And then there are 3 minor triads. Those occur on 2, 3, and 6. And again, as I mentioned, there is a diminished triad, which is lowercase like minor, but with this little circle, which means diminished, and that occurs naturally on the 7th scale degree. Again, it does happen, but it's very rare, and so usually we'll just kind of skip over this. But you can try it out if you want. So because the Roman numerals are not key specific, notice here I put key of C. So we often denote the key by just saying what key we're in. Then we can go ahead and talk about these Roman numerals. I know this might, to some of you, seem like a lot of information, but I hope that showing this example in Wild Mountain Time will show a little, shed a little light on it. So here we just saw this progression with Wild Mountain Time, and now I have labeled the Roman numerals for this key. So it's in the key of G. That means the G chord gets a capital 1, 1 because it's the first scale degree of the key, and capital because it's major. E minor, if you count up G, A, B, C, D, E, that's up to 6. So it's the 6th scale degree. So an E chord is the 6 in G, and it's lowercase, uncapitalized because it's minor. So the M here in this symbol shows minor. Here it's the lowercase. So you can go through and look at these. Just to give one last go around at this. Major 1, minor 6, major 4, major 1, major 4, major 5, minor 6, major 4, minor 2, etc. And so to show why the Roman numerals are useful, again, I talked about changing the key. So I'm going to put a capo on my guitar, which changes the tuning. It just moves the bottom of the guitar up. So now I can play this in a different key. Major 1 is now going to be a B flat, and then it would go to a G minor. I'm not going to spell out those chords, but the point here is now listen to the chord progression. It's the same progression. The key is different, but the Roman numerals are the same. 1, major 1, minor 6, major 4, major 1, major 4, major 5, minor 6, major 4, minor 2, major 1, major 4, major 1, major 4, major 1. So you can hear that the whole key is higher. This is the same in that other key. So all of these chord symbols would have to be rewritten. But this would stay the same. So if you wanted to, kind of summarize a song, this might be a good way to do it. And you might notice, again, this song only has 5 chords, which I think is kind of an average amount. 2 is kind of few. 10 is kind of a lot. Both could be great, but 4 or 5 chords is maybe kind of standard. You can see how they relate to the form, where again we have this repetition. Notice how lines 2 and 4 are the same in terms of chords, and lines 1 and 3 are not the same, but they're close. There's only kind of this one distinction here, or these 2 distinctions between those 2 lines. And the last line, which is kind of a short little tag, that's the same as this line. So yeah, that's how Roman numerals work. And that's pretty much all we're going to get into for today. As I mentioned, I know this is kind of a lot of material. Again, the difference between this and a music theory class is that in a music theory class, you'd be tested on the chords in the key. In this case, we just want to know the concepts. So the concept is, showing the chords in relation to a key using Roman numerals, whereas the chord symbols themselves are equally great, but they're just more flexible. And E minor could happen in several different keys. But if we say G major is the key, and then we say 6, it can only mean E minor if we say G is the key. So yeah, so I put down here a couple examples. I was trying to find some examples of chord progressions that are really simple, and these are just some. There's tons of them out there. Wilco and Gorillaz are not country western guitarists, but they still wrote solid songs with two chords. So that's pretty fun. You can hear what a song, "Ashes of American Flags," that's supposed to be flags, is 1-4-1. This Gorillaz song called Punk is 1-5-1, and there's a million other examples. Um, we're not going to get deep into the blues in this class, but the blues is really fascinating, especially because the traditional 12 bar or 12 measure blues, it's kind of unusual. We usually see 8 measure phrases. So 12 is kind of unique because it's not a power of 2, it's 3 times 2 times 2. So it has these 3 groups. I can go ahead and play the blues progression here real fast. So it's like these are all measures. So there's the first measure is just 1. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. There are different versions of the blues. Sometimes it ends on 5. Sometimes it doesn't go back to 4 here. But if you look up the 12 bar blues, it's pretty awesome because not just in blues, but even in punk and rock and a lot of other genres, you will hear the 12 bar blues progression, which is famous and also an American concept. So this is Bob Dylan's Corinna Corinna, which is just one of millions of examples of the blues. But I partly pointed that out because, all 12 measures are made up of just 3 chords, 1, 4, and 5. So I encourage you to go look at some more examples of music that you like and figure out what the chord progressions are or look them up. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those, especially in our Q&A sessions. Just go ahead and let me know if you have questions. I hope you enjoyed talking about triads and chords today. So next time we'll be looking at spicy chords, other types of chords, vertically and chord progressions that add a lot of more unique flavors to songs. But hopefully this will give you kind of a way of listening to and appreciating some of the songs you already love and finding out how the chords work. Have a great day and see you next time.